Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Good morning, depending where you are. Happy December. We are really excited to be here today to talk about a new resource that the EPA published just about a week and a half ago. My name is Steve Epting. I work at the US EPA headquarters office in our Office of Water. We have a great lineup of presenters. Before we dive in, I'm going to pass it to one of our great contractors that's been helping out on this project, Carrie Phillips, and she's going to give us a few housekeeping reminders before we dive in. Carrie?
Hi, everyone. So just a few items. First, we recommend you use your computer audio so the sound is best for you. During the webinar, please turn off your mic and your camera to avoid distractions. If you have questions, please use the chat box, and that applies to both audiovisual questions, and then as the speakers are doing their presentations, if you have questions, you can type your question into the chat box and we will assemble them and answer them at the end. And then if you would like to speak during the question and answer session, you can either click the raise your hand button or ask to speak in the chat window and we will call on you. And to speak, just unmute by clicking your microphone icon. We have found for the tech support help, we have found that the Microsoft Teams app is best. But if you use a browser, we would recommend using Edge or Chrome as those seem to work the best. If you have connection issues, just wanted to try leaving the webinar and then coming back in. And if you need to, you may call into the webinar with the phone number that we put in the chat box. And then I also heard it was included in the reminder email. So that would be helpful. If you have AV questions, you can type those in the chat window and we will respond to you. And then if you're experiencing any other issues, you can email liz.hyatt@tetratech.com and she can work with you one-on-one. Some other best practices is, if you would like to show support to the speakers while they're talking, you can use the react buttons. We are recording this and we're going to post it for later viewing. So please be mindful that anything you post in the chat box will be included on that as well. And if you don't mind leaving your cameras off and your microphones off to remove disruptions, that would be great. But we can also help mute if there is a problem with somebody's connection. We will be posting this recording online on EPA's website in January. So I can pass it back to Steve. Thank you, Steve.
Okay, great. And I'm just waiting for my slides to queue up here. I'll just check, Carrie. Can you see those coming through okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. Well, hi, everybody. It's really great to be here. We're excited about this lineup of presenters that we have today. Again, my name is Steve Epting. I work at the US EPA headquarters in our Office of Water, and specifically within our National Non-Point Source Program. I'm just going to toggle us forward and give you a sense of what we have planned for our time today. I'm going to pass it over in just a moment to Mike Scazafava, who's going to offer some opening remarks. And then Larry Morin and I, who co-led this development of this project at EPA, are going to give kind of a quick tour of the new resource guide and federal funding program inventory before we really get into the spotlights. We have 5 different presenters, each of whom will be giving kind of a snapshot overview of their programs that are spotlighted in a bit more detail in the resource guide. So parts of the guide are coming to life on this webinar today. Along the way, if you have questions or comments or reactions, challenges, successes that you've seen in your tribal environmental programs, would love to hear about those. So feel free to use the chat. And then we should have some time for Q&A at the end. So before I pass it to Mike, I'm going to tee up a couple poll questions just so we can get a sense of who's in the room. So Adriana? Okay, great. So you should see a poll in your chat. And the first question we have is looking to just get a sense of who's in the room And the question is, who do you represent here today? Are you with a tribe or nation, a federal government agency, state or local government, an NGO, or other? Okay, great. So most folks in the room are calling in on behalf of a tribal program. Then we've got a good number of folks from a federal government agency. Great. And then Adriana, if you can tee up the next question. So one thing that we'll be giving you an overview of in the resource guide are the different conservation topics that we dive into throughout the guide. And so this question is, you can pick one or more, and we're curious, whether you work for a tribal program or otherwise, which of these conservation topics do you consider part of your regular day-to-day work? Okay, great. So we've got, not surprisingly, a lot of water friends here, and then a good number of folks that consider climate change and natural hazard preparedness part of their core work, supporting and engaging communities. Great. Well, there'll be something in this webinar for everybody. Thanks for that input. Okay, great. So at this point, I'm going to pass it over. We're really happy to have Mike Scazafava, who is the acting director of our EPA headquarters Watershed Restoration, Assessment, and Protection Division, here today to kick us off. So Mike, I'll pass it to you.
Great, thanks, Steve, and good day, everybody. I know it's mostly afternoon, some morning on the West Coast, but thank you so much for being here, taking the time to attend this webinar, and want to thank all of our speakers for sharing your experience and expertise today. It seems like it's going to be a really helpful event. And then also thanks to all of the tribal and federal representatives that played a part in developing this new resource guide. I think you're going to find that this is a really great product, and hopefully one that will help you along your way as you're working to protect human health and the environment. And then finally, I just want to thank 3 people at EPA who played a critical role in moving this project forward. Steve Epting, who you just saw, Margot Buckaloo, and Larry Morin, who really did the lion's share of work, especially towards the end, getting this over the out to our partners. So I want to recognize the critical role that tribal environmental programs play in protecting and restoring waters across the country. You are vital to our EPA's mission to protect human health and the environment. And I'm so glad that so many of you are here on this call today, and in our program work through the Non-Point Source program, through Watershed Protection Program, we're able to learn from you and support you in your mission. As we saw in the poll question, as we've heard simply from some of our listening sessions from the Non-Point Source program, I know that tribal environmental program staff frequently wear multiple hats and lead programs across the environmental media, from protecting water quality to managing lands to emergency response to air quality. And that's a lot to try and get your handle on. At EPA, we have huge offices devoted to each one of those. And then I can't imagine the one person in a small tribal program trying to handle all of these issues. And one of the things that we frequently hear is it's a challenge to build connections across these programs, and making these connections and finding opportunities to leverage resources is a challenge day to day for all of you. Particularly searching federal assistance opportunities, preparing grant applications, managing those grants, reporting. And so this resource hopefully will is a starting point to help you along the way. It will not fully address all of the challenges you face, but it certainly is, a starting point, as I said, for educating both tribal nations and federal staff on strategies, for achieving tribal environmental goals. So with that, I won't speak any longer, and I'll let the great panel talk to you about the guide, but I'm happy to be here and really appreciate everybody taking a little bit of time out of your day today to learn about this new resource.
Great, thanks, Mike. Okay, so I'm going to kick it off with Larry Morin, and we're going to give kind of a quick tour of this new resource guide and some of the supplemental materials before we pass it over to some of our tribal programs that are spotlit in the guide, and then a few of our federal agency representatives who are going to give brief overviews of some of the tribal assistance programs that are available to support tribal environmental work. So as we've mentioned a couple times already, those of us at EPA that have been leading this project work in what's called our Clean Water Act Section 319 Non-Point Source Program, or NPS program. Suspect that a good number of folks that tuned in today are part of the non-point source community. But if you're not, just a kind of a quick overview of this program. Non-point source, or NPS pollution, is really an umbrella term that refers to any source of water pollution that is coming from a source that's not regulated under the Clean Water Act. So this graphic kind of gives you a sense of everything that falls under that umbrella. Non-point source pollution can be everything from agricultural field runoff, timber harvesting, abandoned mine drainage, and leakages from septic systems as examples. So the federal tools that are available to address non-point source pollution is EPA's National NPS program, which provides grants to states, territories, and federally recognized tribes and nations to tackle NPS pollution. We currently have 200 plus federally recognized tribes and nations. I think we're at about 214 tribal grantees that are eligible to receive annual Section 319 grants, which can support both tribal staff as well as on-the-ground projects. And that number of tribal grantees grows by about 5 new grantees each year. So the idea for this project really came from two main places, going back about 1.5 years, 2 years ago. One is that at the EPA, we have a number of tribal policies and plans that emphasize the importance of coordinating with other federal agencies to support tribal partners. One of those plans is pictured on the right. It's called our Office of Water Action Plan. And in that plan, we highlight a goal of our non-point source program, working with other agencies like U.S. Department of Agriculture, again, to support our tribal program partners. Mike alluded to some work that we did in the non-point source program going back a couple years. That was a series of listening sessions with our tribal grantees to help inform some work in the National Non-Point Source Program to better support our tribal grantees. We had an equity work group, we called it, that developed a recommendations report for EPA to consider. And some of the recommendations in that report were really pointing at the opportunities that our tribal partners see in terms of connections between our 319 grants and other federal assistance programs that can fund very similar activities, but also highlight the challenge of coordinating those assistance opportunities together. And so the ask of EPA at the time was to develop an inventory of federal funding and technical assistance programs that could support non-point source type work, to develop some partnership-based case studies where our tribal programs already successfully leveraging support from multiple federal programs, and then an ask that that EPA develop stronger relationships with other federal agencies to find ways to better support the tribal community. So that really informed what were two main goals for this project, and you're going to hear about the resource guide today. We set out to develop a resource guide for tribal environmental programs that really put in one place in a digestible format a set of information that would help guide you as you are pursuing federal assistance. And so if you kind of wade through the resource guide and supplements either today or at a later date, you'll see that the resource guide contains an inventory, kind of points you to places to start your search for federal funding and technical assistance, spotlights multiple tribal case studies, and then throughout the guide, we have tribal best practices that we heard from tribal programs as well as from federal agency reps on what they would suggest to tribal programs that may be newly pursuing federal assistance for conservation work. The other thing that we were tracking over the course of this project was where are we seeing opportunities for us within the federal government to better support and better deliver our tribal assistance programs. So we had a model for this project, which was a kind of smaller in scope resource guide or in-depth fact sheet that we published in 2022. You can find this online. And this short fact sheet, I guess it's kind of a long fact sheet, this 10-page fact sheet highlights opportunities for tribal water quality programs or tribal environmental programs more generally to work with both EPA water quality grants and NRCS, U.S. Department of Agriculture's Natural Resource Conservation Service funding programs. So we kind of drew connections between our two agencies' funding sources to spotlight how tribal programs can work with both to get larger projects completed. So this project was pretty involved in terms of being much larger in scope. We looked across the federal government to put together the resource guide and funding program inventory. And that really was possible because of our project teams. So I want to give a shout out to our federal project team. You see those folks listed on the left here, as well as our tribal project team, who were really critical and terrific at providing us input on how best to make this resource guide most helpful for tribal program users of it. So James Simmons, Tammy Montoyo, Becky Finn, and Chris Head, a big thanks to all of you. And then I'll just lastly give a shout out to two partnership groups that provided coordinating support. The National Tribal Water Council, one of EPA's tribal partnership groups, as well as the Federal Interagency Water Subcabinet Tribal Team, which is a group that's co-led by the EPA and the Bureau of Reclamation. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Larry Morin to talk a bit more about the guide.
Thank you, Steve. So we have two main deliverables that we put up on the EPA website. So these came out a couple of weeks ago, first week of December. So we have a PDF resource guide document, and we also have a federal funding program inventory, which is an actual Excel spreadsheet that you can download. We got feedback from our federal and tribal project teams that an Excel sheet would be easier to query and sort, and not having a big table in the guide would make it more readable and not bog down the guide with too much data. So And we also have a PDF version of the inventory up on the website for folks that want to download a PDF version of that. Next slide, Steve. So early on, when we were working with the federal project and tribal project teams, we developed a scope for this guide, and our main target audience really was tribal environmental program managers and staff that work in federally recognized tribal governments. We really focused on some of the programs that are available to federally recognized tribes. And we landed on organizing our guide around 6 main conservation topics where a lot of funding and technical programs fit within these topics. So the 6 topics are protecting and restoring waters, protecting air quality, protecting wildlife and habitats, addressing climate change and natural hazards, stewarding lands, and engaging and supporting communities. And we came up with this diagram that you can see here. It's a wheel, and it's inspired by the medicine wheel concept, showing how all of these conservation areas are connected. And there's a medicine wheel down in the lower right-hand corner there. And the colors there can mean different things to different people, but the circle really represents the indigenous worldview as opposed to the Western linear worldview, showing connection between water, native species, and indigenous culture. So that medicine wheel graphic came from Coral Avery at the Bureau of Indian Affairs Northwest Climate Adaptation Science Center. Next slide. Each of these 6 conservation topics is organized in the same way. So we have an introduction that defines the topic, and then we get into some example planning frameworks for each of the topics. So we have a table showing various planning that tribal staff can do within each of the topics, and some examples and links to those plans. We have technical resource spotlights, and that's an inset box that kind of highlights tools, reports, or other resources for each conservation topic. We highlight climate change considerations. That's another inset box showing how climate change intersects with each conservation topic, and also tools available to assist tribes in considering climate change. We have an example in each conservation topic showing how a tribal program incorporated indigenous knowledge under each topic. And we also have program spotlights that feature 4 to 6 federal programs in each conservation topic that a large number of tribal programs are utilizing. And then we also have a tribal case study under each conservation topic, and I'll talk more on the next slide about those. So we selected one case study to highlight under each conservation topic, and this shows we selected 6 case studies that showed examples of how the programs were leveraging multiple grants or funding sources from one or more agencies, or they used 638 contracts or waivers or other mechanisms to reduce or meet the matching requirements, or they developed partnerships, weaving together various programs and projects that complement each other, or were these best practices for finding funding solutions or writing grant applications. So we're going to be featuring 2 case studies today, one from the Upper Snake River Tribes Foundation and the other from the Bishop Paiute Tribe. Next slide. So when we started this effort, we started with something that was being done called the Access to Capital Clearinghouse. This is on the Bureau of Indian Affairs website, and it was launched during the 2023 White House Tribal Nations Summit. And this was in alignment with the executive order to reform federal funding and support for tribal nations. And the clearinghouse features hundreds of programs, even outside of the conservation area, and is really a centralized database for tribal program staff to access funding opportunities. So we started with that and really looked at the programs that were related to one or more conservation topic to feature in the guide. And we were able to pull some data points such as eligibility, whether the opportunities are competitive or non-competitive, and matching requirements to help us kind of build the foundation for our program inventory in the conservation guide. Next slide. And so just to summarize the funding program inventory, you can find information on that in 3 different places. So within the guide, we have a quick reference table that's in there, and that features about 35 programs. And then we have program spotlights, which those are within the conservation topics and get into a lot more detail on each of those programs. So there's about 30 of those. And then we also have a separate supplement to the guide that you can download off the website that I mentioned earlier. That's an Excel format, and we also have a PDF version of that one. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to our first tribal program speaker, and it's going to be Scott Hauser, and he is the Executive Director for the Upper Snake River Tribes Foundation. Scott, are you able to unmute yourself?
Yes. Thank you, Larry. So I will go ahead and share my slides.
Sounds great. Thanks, Scott.
Does that look okay?
Yeah, that looks great. Thank you, Scott. Go ahead.
Yep. Thank you very much. As Larry said, I'm Scott Hauser, Executive Director with the Upper Snake River Tribes Foundation, located in Boise, Idaho. Also, the National Tribal Water Council was mentioned a bit ago, and I sit on the Water Council as an at-large member for Region 10. So I appreciate the opportunity to come to you today. So a little bit about the Upper Snake River Tribes Foundation. It's composed of 4 tribes: the Burns Paiute in Eastern Oregon, the Fort McDermott Paiute Shoshone tribe in Northern Nevada, Southern Oregon, Shoshone Bannock tribe in Eastern Idaho, and the Shoshone Paiute tribe of the Duck Valley Reservation, which is in Southern Idaho and Northern Nevada. Fort McDermott and Shopais are EPA Region 9 tribes, and Shoshone Bannock and Burns Paiute are EPA Region 10 tribes. USERT was originally formed in 1998. In 1997, it was established as a 501c3 nonprofit. We have multi-part 4 objectives in our USERT charter: land, water, air, fish and wildlife, cultural resources, and ensuring the federal trust responsibility. Originally, USERT was formed largely to have a unified voice across the 4 tribes of the Upper Snake. And that was largely due to the loss of salmon and steelhead in the Upper Snake River Basin, which was a staple subsistence, cultural, spiritual food source for the Upper Snake River tribes. Over many decades, the anadromous species were blocked from the Upper Snake. And the final issue was the Hells Canyon Complex, which is a series of 3 dams straddling the Idaho-Oregon border on the Snake River. In the past decade, USART has expanded its work to include climate resilience work, youth education, particularly centered around climate, and community outreach, again, largely regarding climate. And I should mention quickly, I began working at the Upper Snake River Tribes in 2012. And at that time, I was hired on as the environmental program director. And kind of my overarching goal from the USART Commission was to develop a climate program for USART. It wasn't until fall of 2016 I became the executive director. So the policy of the Upper Snake River Tribes, as you can see, which is adopted by all 4 of the USART tribes, is that we will pursue, promote, and where necessary, initiate efforts to restore the Columbia River and Snake River systems and affected unoccupied lands to a functioning ecosystem. This includes the restoration of component resources to conditions which most closely represent ecological features associated with ecosystem-based function. In addition, USART will work to ensure the protection, preservation, and the enhancement of rights and interests reserved by treaty, federal laws, mandates, executive orders, and any inherent Aboriginal rights. So as I mentioned, when I started in 2012, I was asked to start a climate program at USART. And so for the first couple of years, really, I had very little experience working on climate. So I went to as many conferences as I could, as many workshops, met colleagues all around the Columbia Basin, tribal, non-tribal. And in 2014, I applied and successfully received a climate BIA climate resilience grant. And at the same time, I also received a EPA GAP supplemental grant. And combining those two combining those 2 funding sources, we were able to do a climate change vulnerability assessment beginning in early 2015. We finalized that in 2016. Next, we did a climate adaptation planning process. We found with our climate vulnerability assessment, we came up with a really slick report, but it was largely sitting on shelves, so we wanted to think a little differently. We developed again an adaptation planning process, which includes a climate action strategy workbook. We provided some funding to each of our 4 tribes to do climate pilot projects, and we created a series of climate videos featuring each of our 4 tribes, which you can find on USART's website. We then did a climate change and adaptation strategies for rangeland managers. Ranching is one of the largest enterprises amongst our 4 tribes. So it was a little outside of what we normally do, but it was very important work. Next, partnering with tribes throughout the Columbia Basin and then later nationally, we came up with a tribal climate resilience action database, which is an ongoing project. After my presentation, I can put the link in the chat. It's live on the internet. There's almost 5,200 climate strategies that tribes across the nation can take. And all of those strategies were taken from publicly available tribal climate adaptation plans. That's something we're very interested in keeping updated regularly. We are in the early stages of starting a tribal climate hazard mitigation planning process, where we will develop. Burns Paiute already has a FEMA-approved mitigation plan. Our other 3 tribes do not, so we'll be focusing on those 3 tribes to develop a hazard mitigation plan that we will then hopefully be adopted by FEMA, which will open up a world of new opportunities. We started a climate-based community outreach and education program, and that's largely focused on tribal youth. And in that, we have put on a series of field trips for tribal climate field trips, excuse me, with our 4 tribes. And we did our first one in 2021, and we have just expanded on that work every year. And then finally, we received a EPA Environmental Justice Collaborative Problem Solving grant, and I've hired on a new staff member several months ago to take on that work. And it again will focus largely on tribal youth, but we also want to focus more broadly on the whole tribal community as a whole. And so with all of those projects that I just talked about, they have been funded by numerous federal entities, including Bonneville Power, BIA, Environmental Protection Agency, U.S. Forest Service, and U.S. Geological Survey through the Northwest Climate Adaptation Science Center. We've also received some private foundation funding, as well as some funding from the University of Washington. However, as I know, without EPA GAP funding, really none of these projects would have been possible. Some EPA GAP supplemental funding has gone directly to project work. However, every one of the projects that I showed previously, GAP funding has funded EPA, or excuse me, USERT staff to take on that work. So without EPA GAP funding, one, we wouldn't have been able to start a climate program, because when I first came here, I was funded under EPA GAP, and nor would we be able to continue to work on climate programs and continue to build our climate programs. EPA GAP funding, while the other federal agencies have been significant, EPA GAP has again been, the bedrock of all of the climate work that we've done, and we continue to do, and we hope to do in the future. Really appreciate EPA's willingness to help us develop what I think is one of the best climate programs of any tribal consortia in the nation. And so I think we will be doing questions, Q&A after all of the presentations. So unless there's some pressing question and we want to jump into it, I will just, of course, stay online and answer any questions if there are any. I will also check the chat. And as I mentioned, you can go to our website. We have all of our climate programs under the projects tab. And then under the video tabs, you can see all of the videos that I mentioned earlier.
Thank you, Scott. That was really great. Yeah, and I think we're going to have a little bit of time at the end for some questions. So we're going to move on to our next speaker, and I'll introduce Brianda Hernandez. And she is the Water Quality Program Coordinator with the Bishop Paiute Tribe. And I see Brianda is pulling up her slides, and I'll pass it over to her.
Thanks, Larry. Hopefully everybody can hear me. Hi, as Larry mentioned, my name is Brianda Hernandez. I am the Water Quality Program Coordinator for the Bishop Paiute Tribe. And today I'm going to be discussing how the Bishop Paiute Tribe has been able to leverage multiple funding sources to support our wetland habitat. A little bit about the Bishop Paiute Tribe. It is located in the eastern Sierra Nevada near Bishop, California, in EPA Region 9. The tribe has approximately, or a little bit over 2,300 members, tribal members, and has one of those smallest land masses at 875 acres of a lot of tribes, and particularly here in California. But even though the tribe is challenged with a lot of with land, they were able to establish a 25-acre wetland. Although it was first established as a mitigation area to offset development, it's become much more than that in the last 15 years. So you can see here is a map of the conservation open space area, or COSA, which I'm going to be referring to for the rest of the of my time. It kind of, you can see that it's kind of surrounded by the Indian Health Project and a bunch of other different buildings. The COSA has become a necessity for corridor for wildlife movement. So we do get a lot of white deer that come down from the mountains and kind of stay there during like the really cool winters. We have, different bird species that kind of sit and migrate and sit in or go through the COSA. And the COSA also serves as a allows for natural water flow and allows for recharging of the groundwater. The COSA also is a area that supports a ton of different endangered and endemic species to the Owens Valley. For instance, we have the endangered Inyo County star tulip, as well as the Owens Valley, or the Owens Valley checker bloom seen here, and then the Owens pupfish, which I'll talk about a little bit more in further slides. And the COSA also serves as a huge community and educational area. So it's a great site for education and outreach events that benefit both the tribal community and the wider community for recreation, hiking trails, bird watching. So here we took some first graders out. We do this all the time. First graders from a neighboring town came in and were like, we would like to do bird watching. And so we have the perfect space for it. And we also, it serves as a great demonstration for the different and awesome things that various tribes in the Owens Valley are doing. In this photo here, the EPA Region 9 Administrator, Martha Guzman, actually visited the tribal homelands of the Bishop Paiute, and we were able to kind of show her the wetland and all the great work that we're doing there. Okay. And then the conservation over the COSA also serves as a training space for tribal staff, our summer interns, and our newly created tribal conservation crew. And it also is a great stewardship area for the community to come and actively engage and contribute and give back. So Bishop is a well-known area for recreation, and they have a lot of different festivals that happen here. And so we kind of engage the community by allowing for stewardship projects to be done in the COSA. And we are doing some prescribed burning here and some mark and recapture with our partners at California Department of Fish and Wildlife. This is the Environmental Management Office, and I'm proud to say that we've actually added 5 more people since this, since we started this, since September of this year. So a little bit about the COSA timelines, and just quickly, I'm not going to get into the specifics of each grant since they're going to be covered later in the webinar, but the tribe launched its water quality program and environmental management office using the EPA's GAP and Clean Water Act sections 106 and 319 programs in 1998. Since then, in 2010, the tribe leveraged the U.S. Bureau of Rec Native American Affairs grant to start the development of to start building the ponds and start the development of the COSA. In 2011, the tribe was awarded the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service's Tribal Wildlife Grant to monitor the invasive species such as the perennial pepperweed. So before the COSA was now a protected wetland or conservation area, it was used as a grazing lot. And so with that came a lot of invasive species. So we're still managing those. In 2012 and 2019, the tribe received the Wetland Program Development Grant from EPA. This allowed us to develop a wetland program plan and prioritize wetland restoration locations, identify effective restoration techniques, and to start beginning the water quality data, collecting the data in the wetlands. Now the COSA serves as a refuge to the endangered Owens pupfish, which were introduced in 2024. So I'll talk a little bit about that. So this was a huge feat, I believe. Like, to me, I think this is like the biggest thing that has happened in the COSA, and it's a huge win, not just for the Bishop Paiute tribe, but for the entire Indian country. This was a 15-year-long journey with the Bishop Paiute tribe and our former director, environmental director, Brian Atkins, taking a proactive approach to the conservation of a local protected small tiny fish, which is the Owens pupfish. This required the passing of legislation back in 2016, which was the California Assembly Bill 2001. And this is the Owens Pupfish Protection Act. So basically this allowed us to be able to translocate or remove endangered or federally endangered species, as well as a California endangered species, from its not from its natural, but like from protected areas onto a new refuge. In 2024, there was a signing of the Safe Harbor Agreement between the Bishop Paiute Tribe, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Services, and the California Department of Fish and Wildlife. This allowed us on April 21st, on our Earth Day event, the tribe was a tribal council, along with tribal staff, and various different agencies released the endangered Owens pupfish into the newly established Owens Pupfish Refuge within the tribe's conservation and open space area. So this was huge. This was, you can see our community coming out to kind of see the unveiling or the release of these protected species and putting them back on tribal lands. So now, using the EPA GAP and Clean Water Act sections 106 and 319 programs, the waters for the pupfish are monitored and managed weekly and monthly. This is not the end of it. So we do suffer a lot from harmful algal blooms in the pond. So we plan to leverage even more federal funding to kind of help us address some of those through the implementation process of 319, or using other entities like the U.S. Bureau of Rec and U.S. Fish and Wildlife Services grants for to make sure that the fish are protected and are going strong for the remainder of, hopefully forever, and hopefully establishing a new space for these fish to thrive and to hopefully one day be taken off that list of them being an endangered species. And I went through that pretty quickly, sorry, but I look forward to any questions on the Q&A or at the end. Thank you.
Thank you, Brianda. That's really an amazing story to hear about the pupfish coming back and all the great work that you're doing. So thanks again. So we're going to move now to our federal program speakers. So they're going to be highlighting some of the federal programs that we're featuring in the conservation guide. So the first speaker I'm going to invite up is Christine Reed, and Christine is with the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation, and she is the Native American Affairs Advisor. So I'll pass it over to Christine.
Hi, everyone. My name's Christine, as Larry just said. I mainly work on Indian water rights settlement for the Bureau of Reclamation. However, I do work with a lot of our other tribal programs within Bureau of Reclamation. So I'm going to go through a PowerPoint that talks about some of our current open funding opportunities and some examples of projects that we have funded in the past. These PowerPoints will be saved so you can go back and reference them. If you want to come to our website, email somebody on a specific program to get additional information, I definitely encourage you. You can also reach out directly to me, and I can put you in contact with your local office that can help you work through the grant application process if you would like to apply to a grant with us. I am going to pull that up real quick. Can you see it?
Yes, Christine, maybe if you could switch to the presenter mode. Looks like it's loading here. There we go. That looks great.
Okay. So our main webpage that you can find us is www.usbr.gov/native/. And so the first one that I want to talk about is one that's currently open, and it is open till February 27th. As I'm talking about these programs, one thing that I wanted to point out is we have many funding programs. We have 2 specifically for tribes only, the first 2 that I'm going to talk about today. And then also I'm going to talk about general grant programs that we have that are tribes are eligible to apply for. It's just open to everybody else also. And again, these are FY25 information. So every year our funding can change. So sometimes the funding limits change, the amount we have available for funding changes. So again, I just want to clarify, this is just FY25 information. So our main program is the Tribal Technical Assistance Program. And for FY25, we are allowing up to $1 million per project, $2 million per tribe. A unique thing about this program is the laws that created the Bureau of Reclamation limits us to the tribes in the 17 Western states. And we've put the list up there just in case if you're not sure if you're in one of our 17 states. And the purpose of our technical assistance program funding is to provide funding for projects that support tribes in efforts to develop, manage, and protect tribal water and related resources. It's a little bit broader than some of the other funding programs that we have. We've also changed our application a little bit this year. Tribes can apply through grants.gov. We are now accepting paper copy and email submissions, trying to reduce the government burden a little bit for everyone. The information for this funding site, the link is here if you're interested in applying for this particular program. These are just some examples of previously funded technical assistance projects we've done through this. It can be water needs assessment, water planning and management studies, whether it's drought response, conservation efficiency improvements. We can do water quality and quantity data collection and assessments, especially if it's in support of a planning project that you're working on. We can provide funding for training for tribal staff and managers in areas of different water resource development management roles. Emergency response to natural or man-made disasters affecting water-related resources. Minor replacement or rehabilitation of existing tribally owned water-related structures and facilities, water source development and enhancement and improvement projects, preliminary engineering reports, irrigation system restoration, rehabilitation and repair, stock watering infrastructure improvements, stabilizing stream banks and erosion control. And one thing I want to clarify is this is not an all-inclusive list. This is just some of the projects that we funded in the past. We currently have a drought relief program for tribes that is funded from the Inflation Reduction Act for FY25. We are hoping to have this released this coming Friday, the 20th. It may be the beginning of next week. We're just getting the final approvals on it. This is for funding up to $2 million per project per tribe. Again, this particular tribal-only program is only for tribes in the 17 Western states. And the objective of this grant program is to provide near-term drought relief for tribes impacted by a reclamation project. And that's kind of the key word there is if you're impacted by a reclamation project. Once this opens, it should be open for about 90 days. So we anticipate sometime in April it would close once we open it. And again, you can apply for this through grants.gov. You can submit paper copies, email submissions, and I've got a link to our website where that announcement will be posted once it's released. Here's, again, not an all-inclusive list of what we would fund, but some examples of things we have funded recently. Near-term drought relief actions to mitigate drought impacts for tribes impacted by the operation of a reclamation-owned water project, including but not limited to addressing drinking water shortages, mitigate loss of tribal trust resources, repair, rehab, restoration, replacement, or improvement of water resource infrastructure adversely impacted by drought, drought response and mitigation planning, needs assessment studies and reports and related activities to strengthen tribal capacity to develop, manage, and protect water resources impacted by drought, and then minor emergency rehabilitation, replacement, repair, and renovation of existing water-related infrastructure that have been adversely impacted by drought, basically physical facilities that are planned, designed, constructed, and operated for supply, treatment, pumping, storage, transmission of water. The next program I want to talk about is WaterSmart. WaterSmart is open to everyone. It's not tribal specific. And at any given time, there is a large array of different funding opportunities. And they have different objectives. And so it's too much for me to squish into 10 minutes in this particular program that we're doing today, but I've included their website here. Some of these have a cost share. Some of these have waivers on the cost share for tribes. I highly recommend if you think one of these programs would work for you to reach out to us, and we can explain on that particular program how the cost share would work for a tribe. Now, most WaterSmart programs are for the tribes in the 17 Western states and American territories. However, some of our WaterSmart programs are available nationwide, and you have to look at each individual funding announcement that goes out to figure out which one is which. And I apologize that, some of these, they just change. It really depends on the source of the funding for these different programs. So we've got technical assistance as one of our main sources at WaterSmart, but we have water and efficiency and energy efficiency grants, small scale water efficiency projects, environmental water resource projects, aquatic ecosystem restoration projects, water strategy grants, project design grants. And on our webpage, we always post who received funding and what a synopsis of what the project was. So if you want to get an idea of all of the different types of projects funded under these different grant programs. We've got a cooperative watershed management program, drought response program, basin studies, applied science. The applied science one tends to go more towards universities and tribal colleges. And then we've got our desalination construction program. And so again, I know it's a lot of different funding opportunities. I don't want to overwhelm anyone. So I highly recommend either reaching out to me directly or reaching out to our website to get additional information. I've put Jeff Morris, our National Program Manager, his contact information on here. Kelly Tittenser, who runs the Native American Affairs Technical Assistance Funding Program, myself, and then also our program's website. Thank you.
Thank you, Christine. That's a lot of great information. So folks have your contact information there and also the link to the website. So we're going to pass it to our next federal program speaker. And I want to introduce Nicole Williams, who is with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And Nicole is a National Community Support Specialist. So I'll turn it over to Nicole.
Thank you. As I try to navigate this Teams presentation, give me just a second.
Okay, yeah, your slides look great.
Okay. I'm trying to, okay, that's as best as I can do. I can't go further on that one. All right, thank you. My name is Nicole Williams. I work for the Department of Interior's Fish and Wildlife Service in the Office of Conservation Investment. I'm here just to tell you a little bit about some of the fish and wildlife programs that we have available for our tribal partners and how Office of Conservation Investment is trying to mitigate barriers to access of this financial assistance with a couple of new ways of applying to these programs. So the service mission statement says that we are working with others to conserve, protect, and enhance fish, wildlife, plants, and their habitats for the continuing benefit of the American people. The only way that we really can do this is through our financial assistance. So the service is quite dependent on financial assistance and the collaborations that we have with our partners, especially our tribal partners. Some of our competitive programs, which is open to most everyone, to include our tribal partners. This is not an exhaustive list. This is just a brief rundown of some of our most popular programs that are used. We have our Coastals program. You can read what that's intended to impact. Partners for Fish and Wildlife, youth engagement, our Tribal Wildlife Grant Program, which I'm sure many are familiar with, and I know that the representative for that is on this call right now, Mr. DJ Manette. National Fish Passage is quite popular as well, and our wildlife refuge systems. Brianna spoke to our invasive species as well, so we know that our tribal partners are actively using that program. We understand that applying to these competitive grant programs can be quite cumbersome. Many of our tribal partners don't have the capacity to do that. So the Office of Conservation Investment has come up with a new process to help mitigate those barriers. It's called the Small Grants Process. It's a new process for applying to financial assistance funds through our competitive programs and non-competitive programs. It simplifies the application process and award management, including availability to those funds. Some of the details of the small grants process are listed on this slide, but I do have handouts that I will be sharing that you can take with you that has more detail about the small grants process. But in a nutshell, these are for projects that are 200,000 or less, up to 3 years. There's specific topics that need to be, that fall into this process. With fish passage, culvert replacement and dam removal is also okay. So if you feel that like you would want to use the small grants process to apply, it is available to our tribal partners. This is a really quick presentation. I apologize. I don't have a whole lot. We also have the Indian Self-Determination Education Assistance Act funding instruments. This is new to the service relatively. We've been working on this over the past few years. This is another mechanism that we've put in place to assist our tribal partners with access to our conservation funds. It runs differently than what our tribal partners are used to with BIA, because BIA receives a different type of funding. The service receives discretionary funding from Congress, and so we are limited on adhering to the funding source, the congressional intent of the funding for that year, and the program that the funds come from, such as refuges. But we do have this available now as well, and most of it is all non-construction. Up to 3 years for each compact or contract, depending on your status with BIA. And like I said, subject to funds availability. So super quick, and I apologize. Some of the, I'll go to my last slide. Since we're holding on questions, I'd like to share that a few of our success stories with 638 and competitive funding for our tribal partners is of recent. The Jamestown S'Klallam tribe worked with our Refuges Department division to take over co-management of the Dungeness and Protection Islands National Refuges in Eastern Washington State. That was a huge success. It took many years to come into play, but we finally were able to do that. And we have several other of our Native American partners that we work with 638 items up in Alaska, the National Native American Fish and Wildlife Society. So I will add those handouts in our chat so that you can have those available. The handout that has the programs on it has program contact information for the individual programs. So I didn't want to list that in these slides. It'd be too many. And then, of course, if you ever need to contact me, oops, there they go. I'm always available. That is my job. So sorry, that was really fast. A little nervous.
That was great. Thank you, Nicole. And we've put those links to those handouts in the chat for everybody. And again, thanks for highlighting some of those success stories. That's really something we tried to do in the guide here, is to highlight some of those examples of how tribal programs have used some of these funding sources for project success. So we'll move now to our final speaker for today. The final speaker is Pedro Torres, and he is with the U.S. Department of Agriculture Natural Resources Conservation Service, and he is the National Tribal Liaison. So I'll turn it over to Pedro.
Thank you, Larry. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I
And
can
it
hear
looks
you,
like-
and we can see you, and your slides look great.
Okay, you can see them. That's great, because I am seeing slides will appear when they are ready, which is kind of par for the course with my day. So I will start talking while my slides choose to show up on my screen, and apologize for my fumbling. Oh, there we go. Awesome. Again, I'm Pedro Torres. I am the honor of serving as the National Tribal Liaison for Natural Resources Conservation Service. NRCS is a branch of the United States Department of Agriculture. It works with farmers and ranchers to do conservation projects on working lands. We have offices that serve every county in the U.S., its states and territories. If you shoot this QR code, it'll bring you to the service center locator. You can put in your county and it'll give you the contact information for your local field office. One glitch in this, if the field office is in a neighboring county, sometimes it'll show up as there not being a service center. We do have field offices that serve every county, but sometimes we have offices that serve multiple counties, so that's a little bit of a glitch. Again, I mentioned we work with farmers and ranchers on agricultural lands. Now, I always feel it's important to point out that agricultural lands, the definition for NRCS's purposes, isn't exclusive of your conventional farming operations. Yes, we do work with ranchers and crop producers, even tribes that have cattle or orchards or row crops. But we also work with your traditional tribal land management, tribes that manage bison herds or that are managing traditional plant restoration projects. If subsistence agriculture, so it can be something as small as a community garden. So if it's food or fiber, managed for subsistence or for sale, could be. We have do a lot of work with salmon and other types of aquaculture or wild foods, and so agriculture isn't just exclusively for what we think of as being agriculture for the purposes of working with NRCS. Here are our this is like overarching 30,000 foot view of what NRCS does. Our programs, NRCS was primarily founded as a technical assistance program. If you just need technical assistance or engineering designs on your agricultural operation or land management project, NRCS can be of assistance. And then we work with the landowner to develop a conservation plan through technical assistance. And then if the individual wants to look at getting financial assistance to implement that conservation plan, we have two programs primarily pointed at that. Environmental Quality Incentives Program is for reaching sort of a base level of conservation. Once you've reached a basic level of conservation, either through EQIP or on your own, you might be able to qualify for Conservation Stewardship Program, which provides funds for enhancing existing conservation, as well as annual payments for kind of as a reward for the existing conservation. Conservation Reserve Program is an easement program, a little less applicable on tribal lands, especially tribal trust lands, but it is a program that can be utilized to set aside either wetlands or prime agricultural lands from development or from other uses, and especially tribes' fee lands could be put into a conservation easement, and then we reimburse for the landowner for setting aside that. And then watershed protection. And I'll talk a little bit more about some of these in specifics a little bit later. In the world of alternative funding, these are sort of the atypical programs. The Farm Bill gives us statutory authority to do alternative funding arrangements with tribes. And this is only available to federally recognized tribes. These alternative funding arrangements are a little bit like 638 funding in that through AFAs, we can develop a programmatic agreement with the tribe where we're essentially giving the tribe the funds to implement the conservation programs on their tribal lands. It's especially useful in large reservations where you have many agricultural producers, maybe all working under the same agricultural management plan. We will develop the agreement, sign the money over to the tribe, and the tribe administers the contracts for individual producers. This can also be useful when our funding rates don't really meet the cost of doing business in Indian country. It's not uncommon for costs to be higher, especially in more remote reservations. Through alternative funding arrangements, we can pay based on actual costs, and we can also pay for indirect costs, something that we can't do under our regular EQIP or CSP programs. And also, if the tribe has the technical expertise to do the technical assistance for the program themselves, we can reimburse the tribe for the human hours of doing that technical assistance, providing their own technical assistance. We have fairly few grants within Natural Resources Conservation Services, but we have a couple. Conservation Innovation Grant is specifically pointed at helping us kind of innovate our toolkit for providing better conservation, better assistance to tribes. And so CIG has had for the last several years a specific set aside for a priority area for integrating tribal ecological knowledge into conservation practices and planning. And then urban agriculture and innovative production. Most tribes turn off when they hear the urban and urban agriculture and innovative production. While that is the name of the kind of statutory authority for this program, the grants within UAIP are not specific for urban areas, and there is no population threshold. And they do indicate tribes as a primary focus for funding. And then agreements are kind of how we think outside the box, and through agreements we're able to do things like training and trainings and outreach and other kinds of things that aren't kind of within our regular programs. I realized as I'm going through these to minutia, I kind of got ahead of myself, and I have slides for sort of each of these things. So I'm going to move on and talk about these things as they go. Again, I mentioned environmental quality incentives programs. That, like I said, it's our flagship program. In 2024, we funded 1,100 contracts to the sum of $114 million for tribal entities through EQIP and CSP. And kind of really enjoyed saying that in the last 4 years, we've spent 23% more on tribal lands than we did in the previous 5 years. So there's a lot of momentum for us working with tribes. And if you use that QR code, you can get more details on our EQIP program. Through EQIP, we pay for implementing practices, enhancements, and activities. And activities are kind of along the lines of, things that can help advise the conservation planning process. And specifically, we developed an activity just last year that allows us to reimburse a landowner if they want to integrate tribal ecological knowledge or indigenous stewardship methodologies into the conservation planning process. And so if you're developing a conservation plan and you want to include reference to your culturally significant plants and how to manage those in the plan, or how to integrate cultural burning, and you need to bring in your cultural practitioners through this activity, we can fund reimbursing those individuals for their time. I mentioned practices. Practice is kind of how we get work done on the ground with NRCS. And if you, again, use this QR code, it'll bring you to our YouTube channel where you can see some of these practices at work. We are working on developing a Conservation at Work series specifically for tribal projects. Several of the videos that are currently on our YouTube channel are tribal focused, but they are not specifically practices that were developed working with tribes on tribal indigenous management, indigenous stewardship methodologies. We're going to try and focus a few videos specifically on that so that tribal members can see the flexibility of some of our practices and putting them on the ground. Again, alternative funding arrangements. Alternative funding arrangements is great if you've got a tribe that has the coordination to manage EQIP or CSP projects themselves, if you've got the technical assistance available, or again, if simply there's some limitations to working with NRCS because of their payment rates. Currently, there were 2 new AFAs, alternative funding arrangements, started in 2024 for a total of $4 million in obligations, and 10 states are currently negotiating with their tribes for alternative funding arrangements in the next couple of years. Regional Conservation Partnership Program is really great if you've got an organizing partner that wants to work with multiple tribes. We had 8 tribal-led projects for Regional Conservation Partnership Program in 2024 that were funded for a total of over $100 million. And several of them were related to the Intertribal Buffalo Council, who have member tribes in multiple states. And so with them as the leading partner, they're able to do the outreach. They have their own technical assistance. I believe these were alternative funding arrangements within Regional Conservation Partnership Programs, so they're able to pay based on actual costs. Because they're the lead on this RCPP, they can do the coordination of multiple tribes and get the work on the ground, again, for this specific set aside. And then again, I mentioned the grants that are available and agreements, and I think I may have finally caught my slides up with what I talked about. Watershed protection is another area that NRCS is focused on. Emergency watershed protection program specifically goes into effect if there's a disaster, say a flood or a fire, and it's brought in to protect life and property. So if you've got a fire and there's concerns about post-fire erosion affecting properties, and this could be cultural properties, and even though EWP is only kicked in if there is a disaster declaration, tribes can declare the disaster. So even a small fire on a reservation declared a disaster by the tribe can trigger emergency watershed protection funding. And then another program we have specifically focused on planning for watershed management is the PL 566 Small Watershed Program. This provides funding for technical assistance, again, for planning to manage watershed, to decrease vulnerability for floods and fires and those kinds of situations. NRCS data collection. NRCS is responsible for mapping the soils. We've mapped 95% of the nation's soils and hope to get to a full 100% in the near future. If you use the QR code in the upper right-hand corner, it'll bring you to our web soil survey. You can put in a latitude and longitude, or you can draw a polygon around an area on a map, and it'll bring you all the soils information for those soils. Our National Water and Climate Centers have developed the Soil Climate Analysis Network. This is a series of weather sensors and soils monitors that kind of map changes in climate, and working together, they can give us a view of what's going on in different geographic areas. Again, these tools have been used to develop, so the network has been used to develop multiple tools that landowners can use to predict things like degree days, which can be used to predict infestations of pests and that kind of thing. And while NRCS collects and develops this data, it is available to the public. And the different QR codes can get you to some of those. And then the snow survey is something that is done annually by NRCS, mapping what the snowfall is in specific areas, which is the best indicator for what is going to be available for water in the coming spring, and as far as what will come in as runoff into surface water. Our plant materials centers, and you can see they're scattered all over the country, and this is the geographical area that that those plant materials centers cover. They work to develop plant-based solutions, conserve threatened and endangered species, as well as battle invasive species, and that we've done some interesting things with tribes in helping to reestablish traditional plants, especially in areas where, say, those traditional plant populations have been disturbed by other uses. Plant material center's been a really great partner in that realm. Speaking of plants, we have our plant database, which is kind of cataloged all of the different types of plants in the US and the types of conservation benefits that those plants can be available for. Right now, they're in the process of really revamping the culturally significant plants database, working with tribes to where they would like that information about the cultural significance of their plants on the database. It can be featured. The plant guides include what the habitat is like for those plants, how you can reestablish them, and how you can propagate those plants. And that we're working on having a feature where you can get on our plants database and find a specific plant and click on that plant and actually have the plant's name in the native language of tribes that are participating in the program, and even a soundbite where you can hear a native speaker say that plant's name in the traditional practice. In the native language. It's just starting off very early in the process. Presently working with one tribe, the Arikara, I believe it's in South Dakota. But hoping there'll be more interest. We presented on this at Intertribal Agriculture Council's annual meeting just last week, and hope that it'll grow into something again. Do feel it necessary to point out that we do recognize that the names of plants, the traditional names of plants, are the intellectual property of tribes, and we'll only use and include that information in our plant guides on our servers when we have permission to do so, and only as long as we have permission to do so. I do want to talk about our tribal advisory councils. I really feel like this is how NRCS keeps its rudder and its focus. We have tribal advisory councils at multiple levels of the agencies. About 10 states have their own state level tribal advisory committees or councils that advise how funds should be distributed and what priority resource concerns should be in those states. And then our regional tribal advisory councils that have given us a wealth of information on, yes, how we should focus our energies, where NRCS is falling short, and really what, how we can get to the next level of working with tribes. The council is made up of appointed representatives from tribes. The tribe has to actually appoint the individual to be on the council, or from intertribal groups. We have, again, state level tribal advisory councils, and then we have our national tribal advisory council, which is essentially made up of the 3 separate regional tribal advisory councils that meet regionally to advise regional conservationists, and then nationally to advise the overall program. One of the big things that came out of working with tribal advisory councils and through consultation with federally recognized tribes at our annual USDA consultations that are held is our tribal relations strategy. And this really is looking at these kind of 4 unique opportunities to strengthen our work with tribes, and really, one, increase the number of full-time equivalents working with tribes, invest in the career field of tribal liaisons and people who work with tribes, and recognizing that that is its own sort of niche, in the same way as we have foresters and botanists, and we have agronomists, and we have soil conservationists. Our tribal liaisons are a very specific group, and really investing in the career development of those folks. And then one of the shortfalls that we recognized in looking at what we had for work with tribes is our inability to really track where we're putting work with tribes. And even though I'm able to get some data, I have to field data sets from a bunch of different tools and a bunch of different sources, kind of team them together and recognize that it's still not a complete picture. We're trying to get to the point where if I wanted to tomorrow, I could just run a query and pretty readily get a view of what we have working with tribes. And so if you want more information, there's my contact information, and then another QR code, which will bring you to our Tribal Nations page on farmers.gov. This isn't NRCS specific, this is USDA wide, and so it has information on Farm Service Agency and rural development and other opportunities. Sorry, Risk Management Agency. I apologize. It's FPAC wide, which is a subset of USDA. But you can find out more about those agencies as well as NRCS on our farmers.gov page. And that's all I have. Apologize if I ran long, and I know I started late.
Great, no worries. Yeah, you made up for it. And sorry to cut you short. Great, thanks so much, Pedro. That was terrific. Thanks to all of our presenters. We gave everybody a tall order across the board, which was not a lot of time to talk about a lot of programs and a lot of great work. So really what we aimed to do today is just give you a sense of the many different programs and resources available to support tribal conservation work. So I'm just going to wrap up by putting one more link in the chat, which is again where you can find the new resource guide. We're just about at time, so we'll maybe I'll just open it up really briefly and see if there's any questions for our presenters any burning questions. We can take one or two. Otherwise, I think most folks gave contact information, maybe everybody. Okay, great. Well, thanks again, everybody. As Carrie mentioned at the top, we'll have a recording of the webinar up in January on our EPA webpage. Thanks again to our presenters, and thanks for joining.
Thank you.